What if you were told that to become your best self, you have to deliberately put yourself in tough, painful situations? Would you dare to do it?
Welcome to a podcast inspired by the YouTube channel Climb Up Podcast, where we explore topics on personal growth and finding meaning in life.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a philosophy that sounds pretty intense, maybe even a bit, well, painful, honestly.
Yeah, it's David Goggins' concept of embrace suffering.
Exactly.
It's definitely not, a comfortable idea on the surface, but it's got this incredible power behind it. We've gathered quite a bit, notes, articles, research, really digging into Goggins' perspective to see what it's all about.
Right. So our mission here is to figure out what exactly embracing suffering means in his view, look at the life experiences that really shaped this belief for him.
Yeah, where it came from.
Break down its core ideas and then look at, how you might actually apply some of this. And we also need to touch on some potential criticisms we found in the sources. Be fair about it.
It's a fundamental question, isn't it? Why would anyone actively seek out discomfort? Or pain, even?
Yeah, let's unpack that.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so starting at the beginning. What's the core idea here? What is Goggins really saying with embrace suffering?
Well, based on everything we've looked at,
Yeah.
the main point isn't about, just enjoying misery. That's not it.
Okay.
It's more that suffering isn't something you should just automatically run from. He presents it as a fundamental tool.
A tool for what?
A tool for personal growth,
Yeah.
for genuine self-discovery, and for unlocking what he always calls your true potential.
So it's less about just putting up with pain when bad things happen and more about deliberately kind of looking for discomfort.
That's the crucial difference, yeah.
Yeah.
It means intentionally putting yourself into tough spots, challenging situations.
Right.
And using that friction, that difficulty,
Yeah.
to actively build up your mental and physical resilience. He really sees suffering as a teacher.
A teacher, how so?
It shows you who you really are, especially when you think you've hit the wall.
Yeah.
When you feel you have nothing left, but you push anyway. That's when you learn.
It's like putting yourself under pressure to see what you're actually made of.
Exactly. And there's a quote from the sources that just nails it. Suffering is your greatest teacher. If you run from it, you'll never know your true self.
Wow. If you run from it, you'll never know your true self. That really reframes it, doesn't it?
It does.
It stops being just this negative thing that happens and becomes, well, almost essential for understanding yourself and getting past limits you didn't even know you'd set.
And what's really striking is how directly this whole philosophy connects back to Goggins' own life story. This wasn't something he just thought up in an armchair.
No, definitely not.
It was forged in some seriously intense personal experiences.
Right. The sources really emphasize his background. It was a very difficult childhood, wasn't it?
Incredibly difficult. He grew up in an abusive home with a violent father. So he learned really young, through some pretty harsh physical and emotional stuff, that life is fundamentally hard. That wasn't the exception for him. It was the baseline.
And those kinds of struggles didn't just stop in childhood. They carried on before his big transformation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The sources detail his battle with obesity.
Mm-hmm.
He was close to 300 pounds at one point.
Wow.
And he faced learning difficulties, plus the constant sort of grinding pressure of racial discrimination. These weren't small things. They were huge obstacles that, initially at least, made him feel really inadequate.
So how did that shift happen? Going from feeling inadequate because of the struggles to seeing them as the key to his strength?
Well, that's where his whole journey to become a Navy SEAL comes in.
Right.
I mean, just the physical side, dropping over 100 pounds extremely quickly, that was immense suffering right there.
I can only imagine.
But maybe even more telling, he failed the SEAL training multiple times. BDS is famously brutal, and he didn't make it through initially.
Failing something like that repeatedly, that must have been crushing.
You'd think so, right? But the sources really highlight how each failure, each setback, every single moment of pushing through unbelievable physical and mental pain, it didn't break him. It actually seemed to strengthen his resolve.
It solidified the idea.
Exactly. It proved his own theory to himself that confronting and pushing through suffering was the only way forward, the only way to build himself into the person he wanted to become. It became less about the pain happening to him and more about the strength being built inside him because of it.
So in his mind, suffering isn't just this random event that happens. It's almost a state you can choose to engage with, like a dial you turn up.
That's a great way to put it. He really emphasizes that choice. You can pick the comfortable path, avoid the struggle, and, well, probably stay where you are. Or you can choose to embrace it, use the hardship, and let it forge you into someone stronger, more resilient.
Okay, that really clarifies the what and the why behind this, rooted in his own life. So let's get into the nuts and bolts then. What are the core principles he lays out in the sources? How does this embracing suffering actually work according to him?
Right, so one of the big foundational ideas is how suffering strengthens the mind. Not just the body, but the mind itself.
He uses that phrase, right? Callusing the mind. What's that about?
It's just a powerful metaphor. Think about physical work.
Yeah.
Your hands get tougher. They develop calluses to handle the strain.
Yeah.
He says you need to do the same thing to your mind. By exposing it to discomfort, mental strain, pushing through mental barriers, you build up its resilience, its toughness, you callus it.
So deliberately choosing mentally hard tasks or just pushing through when your brain wants to quit, that builds this internal callus.
Precisely. The sources often use the example of, say, a long run or a really tough workout.
Yeah.
Your mind starts screaming, stop, way before your body is actually done for.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
Right. Pushing past that mental wall, that's how you build the callus. It proves to yourself that those limits you feel, they aren't necessarily fixed. They're negotiable.
There's that quote, you have to build calluses on your brain, just like you do on your hands. Callus your mind through pain and suffering. It really sounds like training your brain like a muscle.
It does. And this ties directly into his most famous concept, probably, the 40% rule.
Ah, the 40% rule. Okay, explain that one because it sounds pretty extreme.
It is extreme. And that's kind of the point. The rule, as Goggins states it, is that when you feel like you are absolutely, completely done, like you cannot take another step, you cannot think another thought, you've hit your limit,
Yeah.
you're probably only at about 40% of your actual capacity.
40%. That seems impossible. My brain definitely tells me it's 100%.
Exactly. That's the mind playing tricks on you, according to Goggins. It's your brain's survival instinct kicking in super early. It wants safety. It wants comfort.
So embracing suffering is the key to pushing past that 40% barrier.
Yes, it's the way to access that other 60% that you didn't even realize was there.
So the real governor isn't the body, it's the mind's willingness to tolerate discomfort. And suffering is how you increase that tolerance.
That's the idea. And the quote that hammers this home is, when you think you're done, you're only at 40% of your potential. Those are the limits you set for yourself. It puts the responsibility and the potential right back in your head.
Fascinating. Okay, so it builds mental toughness, helps you push limits. What else? You mentioned self-discovery earlier.
Yes, that's another huge pillar. Goggins is convinced that intense suffering, it strips away all the BS, all the masks, the excuses.
We're being put in a furnace.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. A crucible. When you're truly tested under extreme pressure, who you really are comes out. Your genuine character is revealed.
So it's not just about finding out you can run further, it's about finding out who you are under duress.
Absolutely. The sources talk about things like pushing through a 100-mile ultra-marathon, or just the relentless grind of military training. These aren't just physical feats, they're deep psychological journeys. They show you your breaking points, or maybe that you don't break as easily as you thought. They show you resilience you never knew you had.
Which circles back to that first idea, suffering is the teacher that helps you know your true self.
It all connects.
Yeah.
And that internal aspect is captured in another quote. The most important conversations you'll ever have are the ones you have with yourself. Suffering kind of forces you into that raw, honest, internal dialogue.
And this isn't just about reacting when life throws challenges at you. He talks about making suffering like a choice, a habit.
That's crucial. It's not passive. Goggins strongly advocates for actively, deliberately weaving discomfort into your daily life, like a form of training.
You mean actually seeking out things that are unpleasant on purpose?
On a small scale, yeah, deliberately. Examples from the sources are things like taking cold showers, waking up super early, like 4 or 5 a.m., to work out even when you're tired and don't want to, or tackling the task you dread the most first thing in the day.
So it's not about finding huge tortures every day.
No, it's about these consistent, chosen discomforts. They train your mind, condition your body, so that when the really big challenges hit, and they will play out, you're better prepared to handle them.
It's about building discipline through small, regular acts of choosing the harder option.
Exactly. And there's a quote about the willpower needed. It's not just about your mind, it's about your will. You have to be relentlessly disciplined to put suffering into your day. It emphasizes that discipline muscle.
He also draws a really stark contrast between the pain of this kind of suffering and something else people really fear: regret.
Yes, this is a key piece of his argument. He basically says that the temporary pain of effort, the discomfort of discipline, of pushing yourself, it hurts now, but it's far less damaging in the long run than the pain of regret.
Regret meaning?
Meaning looking back later in life and knowing you didn't give it your all, knowing you chose comfort over reaching your potential. That feeling, he argues, is a much deeper, longer-lasting kind of suffering.
So avoiding the struggle feels better in the moment, but the eventual cost is knowing you held back, knowing what might have been.
That's the trade-off he presents. Choosing comfort today might prevent you from discovering what you're truly capable of. The quote is pretty blunt. The pain of discipline is far less than the pain of regret.
And it feels like this whole philosophy is, in part, a reaction against modern life, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. Goggins is very critical of what he sees as our culture's obsession with comfort, convenience, quick fixes, instant gratification.
The path of least resistance?
Exactly. He believes this constant pursuit of ease is actually making people weaker, mentally and physically, less prepared for real adversity when it inevitably shows up.
So embracing suffering is like an intentional countermeasure, an antidote to that perceived softness.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's about deliberately cultivating the resilience and toughness that he feels our comfortable lives might be eroding.
And that quote really hits hard. You're in danger of living a life so comfortable and soft that you'll die without ever realizing your true potential.
Yeah, it brings it right back to that core idea, suffering as the gateway to finding out what that potential actually is.
Okay, conceptually, this is making sense, but man, it sounds incredibly demanding. How does someone actually start doing this? Are there concrete steps mentioned in the sources?
Yeah, absolutely. The sources do offer practical advice. One of the first steps is pretty straightforward, but maybe terrifying for some. Put yourself in tough situations.
Meaning like deliberately pick things you know are going to be hard or uncomfortable?
Exactly. Choose tasks or challenges that are outside your current comfort zone. Things you normally avoid because they scare you or just seem too difficult. If public speaking makes you anxious, find a small way to do it. If you're totally inactive, commit to walking or running a mile. It's about intentionally stepping into that feeling of discomfort.
Before you even do that, you have to be really honest with yourself, using his accountability mirror idea.
That's fundamental.
Yeah.
He literally talks about standing in front of a mirror and having a brutally honest, no-holds-barred conversation with yourself.
About what?
About your weaknesses, your excuses, your failures, the areas where you know you're falling short. You have to confront the reality of where you are before you can change it. No sugarcoating.
Wow. Okay. That sounds, well, like its own form of suffering right there.
It definitely can be. But it's about facing the truth. And then the advice isn't, okay, now go run 100 miles. It's start small, stay consistent.
Okay, good. So you build up.
Exactly. You don't have to start with something massive. Begin with small, manageable habits that still involve choosing discomfort.
Yeah.
Maybe it's waking up 30 minutes earlier than usual. Maybe it's doing 10 push-ups every day if you normally do none. Reading a challenging article instead of scrolling social media.
Little things.
Little things done consistently. The sources call these small sparks. The idea is that these consistent small efforts build momentum, create discipline, and eventually lead to big wins over time. It's the consistency that matters.
Consistency in choosing discomfort, even minor stuff. That seems key.
It really is. And another tool he talks about, a mental one, is the cookie jar.
The cookie jar? What on earth is that?
It's a mental technique. When you're in the thick of it, when you're suffering and everything in you wants to quit, you mentally reach into your cookie jar.
And what's in the cookie jar?
Memories. Memories of every single past success you've had, every single hardship you've already overcome. You pull one out and remind yourself, I got through that, so I can get through this.
So you're essentially weaponizing your own past resilience against your current desire to quit.
That's a great way to put it. It's proof. Proof to yourself that you're capable, that you've been tested before and survived, even thrived. It refuels you when you feel empty.
Okay, that makes sense. And there's one more really critical point for actually doing this without, ending up in the hospital. Distinguish discomfort from real pain.
Absolutely vital. Goggins himself emphasizes this. You need to learn the difference between the kind of discomfort you should push through, things like muscle fatigue, mental tiredness, boredom, the general suckiness of a hard task.
The stuff that makes you grow.
Right. Versus real pain. Sharp joint pain, chest pain, dizziness, the signs of actual injury or overexertion that could cause serious harm. You embrace discomfort. You listen to and address real pain. One builds you up, the other can break you down permanently.
That's a super important distinction. Okay, so Goggins' background is obviously extreme military ultra-endurance, but the sources suggest this isn't just for athletes or soldiers, right?
Not at all. The principles are presented as being broadly applicable to basically any area of life where you want to improve or overcome challenges.
How might that look in, say, everyday life or work? Can you give some examples?
Here, in your career, maybe it's tackling that massive, intimidating project you've been putting off. Instead of procrastinating because it feels overwhelming.
Which is comfortable in the short term.
Right. Instead, you embrace the discomfort of its complexity. You break it down into smaller, manageable steps, and you start chipping away, even when it feels hard or tedious.
Okay. What about personal growth, like changing habits?
Definitely. Think about breaking bad habits, maybe laziness, unhealthy eating, spending too much time online. Change itself is almost always uncomfortable, right?
Right.
It involves resisting urges, doing things differently. Embracing that discomfort is key to actually making the change stick.
And even in relationships, how would it apply there?
Well, sometimes improving a relationship or even ending one that's unhealthy requires having really difficult, awkward, potentially painful conversations.
Yeah, avoiding those is tempting.
Super tempting. But choosing to face that discomfort, to have the tough talk, to deal with the awkwardness, that's often necessary for any real growth or positive change in that area too.
It makes sense. Discomfort seems like a necessary ingredient for progress almost anywhere you look. But of course, a philosophy this intense, it's bound to have some criticisms, and the sources do bring those up.
Yeah, it's important context to include. One obvious concern people raise is the risk of physical harm.
Looking at some of the stories from his own life, like running on stress fractures, using lots of painkillers, that kind of thing.
The critique isn't necessarily that Goggins didn't achieve amazing things, but that pushing to those specific extremes can easily cross the line. It can border on self-harm, and it might not be a healthy or sustainable model for most people to emulate. There's a difference between pushing limits and ignoring serious injury signals.
Right, and then there's the question of just overall balance in life.
Some argue that this relentless, almost singular focus on seeking suffering and pushing boundaries could potentially crowd out other really important parts of a fulfilling life.
Like what?
Like adequate rest and recovery, which are crucial for long-term performance. Or, relationships that aren't solely based on shared struggle. Or simply allowing for moments of ease, joy, and connection that aren't tied to overcoming hardship. The intensity, some worry, could lead to burnout, or maybe even an unhealthy fixation on discomfort.
Finding that balance. And the sources also mentioned, just briefly, how this philosophy fits with other viewpoints.
Yeah, just noting that it's one way of looking at things and there are others. For example, some discussions referenced in the sources contrast Goggins' approach with, say, Ayn Rand's objectivism, which puts individual happiness and achieving your values more at the center.
How so?
Well, Goggins sees suffering as a tool to achieve values like strength and potential. Other philosophies might see happiness or value achievement as the direct goal, perhaps pursued through different means that don't necessarily require seeking out suffering in the same way. It's just an acknowledgement of different philosophical starting points, not a judgment on them.
So the core message about facing challenges is powerful, but it's definitely worth thinking about the intensity, the potential risks, and how it fits into a bigger picture of a well-lived life.
Exactly. Like any really powerful idea, understanding its potential downsides and nuances is just as important as understanding its strengths.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into David Goggins' embrace suffering philosophy. It's undeniably a challenging concept, but it's clearly one that's had a huge impact on his life and resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, we've seen how it reframes hardships. They're not just obstacles to get around, but maybe essential opportunities to build resilience, discover who you are, and unlock potential you didn't know you had.
Fundamentally, it seems to be about making a conscious choice. Discipline and perseverance over immediate comfort. Recognizing that growth often happens right there in that uncomfortable zone.
That quote we talked about really sums it up, doesn't it? If you can get through doing things that you hate to do, on the other side is greatness.
It's a powerful thought. So here's something to leave you with. If Goggins' 40% rule is even partly right, and you likely have way more capacity than you usually tap into, what's just one small discomfort you could choose to lean into today just to see if you can access even a tiny bit more of your potential, something to chew on?